Honestly, I'm literally still exhausted just thinking about the sheer amount of energy it took to skip past Bifocal's Barbara's aggressively pink golf cart steering wheel. I mean, this is exactly why I started Sovereign Justice in the first place, because people just can't mind their own business, I guess. Anyway, let's see how this plays out.
The Florida sun was beating down like it had a personal vendetta against my neck. It was a Tuesday, right around noon, and I was on a mission. A sacred, stomach-rumbling mission. I was in downtown Naples, a place where the palm trees look like they get weekly manicures, and the air smells vaguely of expensive sunscreen and offshore bank accounts. I'm a 6'2" guy, and I wear heavy leather boots. Not for fashion, just because I like them. And when I walk with a purpose. Heel to toe. Solid contact with the pavement. I was 3 blocks away from arguably the best Cuban sandwich on the Gulf Coast. I could practically taste the roasted pork, the perfectly melted Swiss cheese, the sharp bite of the mustard, and the crisp snap of the pickles pressed between perfectly toasted bread. Thus, my stomach let out a growl that could rival a diesel engine. I picked up my pace. Clack, clack, clack. My boots echoed slightly against the pristine, bleached white sidewalks that lined the avenue. Then, I heard it. The high-pitched, mosquito-like whine of an electric motor being pushed to its absolute limits. I glanced over my shoulder, barreling down the dedicated, oversized sidewalk/cart path was a custom golf cart. This wasn't just any golf cart. This was a lifted, metallic, pearl-white monstrosity with chrome rims and a steering wheel wrapped in fuzzy, aggressive pink material. Behind the wheel was a woman who looked like she had been entirely preserved in a state of perpetual disapproval. She wore oversized, jewel-encrusted bifocals that caught the midday sun and shot lasers of annoyance directly into my retinas. Her visor was pulled down low, and her lips were pursed so tightly they had practically disappeared into her face. She slammed on the brakes. The golf cart skidded to a halt about 3 inches from my left kneecap. "Excuse me?" she barked. Her voice sounded like a chain-smoking parrot. "Excuse me, young man." I'm 32, so I'll take young man, but the tone was entirely unnecessary. I stopped. I looked at her. I looked at her aggressively pink steering wheel. I looked back at her. "Yeah? Can I help you?" "Are you aware of how loudly you are walking?" she demanded, gesturing wildly toward my feet. I stared at her for a solid 5 seconds. I literally let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "How loudly I'm walking?" "Yes, it's aggressive. It's incredibly aggressive pedestrianism." She adjusted her bifocals, glaring at me like I had just keyed her pristine cart. "You are stomping. It's intimidating. You're upsetting the poodles at number 42, and frankly, you are violating the peaceful aesthetic of this neighborhood with your heavy footfalls." I let out a short, sharp laugh. I couldn't help it. "Aggressive pedestrianism? Lady, I'm just walking to get a sandwich. I have legs. They touch the ground. That's gravity. I don't know what to tell you." "Don't you get smart with me," she snapped, her voice pitching an octave higher. "This is a quiet, respectable community. We don't tolerate people marching down the street like they're in a military parade. You look like a hooligan. You're walking like a threat." "A threat?" I asked, leaning slightly on my right leg. "I'm walking at a brisk 3 miles per hour toward roasted pork. But if you find that threatening, you might want to stay indoors." "That's it." She reached into the cup holder of her cart and produced a gold-cased iPhone. "I am calling the authorities. My nephew is on the city council, and we do not put up with this kind of intimidation." "You're calling the cops? Because I'm walking?" "I am calling them right now," she shrieked, already aggressively tapping the screen with a manicured fingernail. I mean, what do you even do in that situation? You wait. Because if I walked away, she'd follow me, and then I'd have a crazy lady in a golf cart tailing me to the sandwich shop, which would ruin the vibe. So, I crossed my arms. I shifted my weight. I watched her talk to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, emergency," she gasped into the phone, clutching imaginary pearls. "There is a large, aggressive man stomping down the sidewalk on Pelican Bay Boulevard. He is refusing to stop his heavy footfalls. Yes, he is intimidating the residents. Send someone immediately." She hung up and glared at me triumphantly. "They are on their way." "Cool," I said. "Do you mind if I order my sandwich on an app while we wait? I'm starving." She just huffed and crossed her arms, staring daggers at my boots. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes later, a white Ford Explorer with police lights flashing lazily rolled up to the curb. The door opened, and an officer stepped out. You could tell just by the way he exhaled before closing the door that he was completely, utterly done with his shift. His name tag read Miller. He adjusted his utility belt, took his sunglasses off, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the golf cart. He looked at Barbara. Then he looked at me. "Barbara," Officer Miller said, his voice flat. "What seems to be the problem today?" "Officer Miller!" she cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This man is disturbing the peace. He is walking with malicious intent. Listen to his boots. He was stomping past my property, intentionally causing a racket and intimidating the neighborhood." Miller turned his tired eyes to me. "Sir, were you stomping?" I held my hands up. "Officer, I was walking, like a normal human being, to get a sandwich. I have big feet and heavy boots. I'm not doing a tap dance routine. I'm just trying to get lunch." Miller sighed. It was a deep, soul-crushing sigh. He walked over to me, keeping a polite distance from the golf cart. "Look, man," he murmured. I sounded his voice low enough so Barbara couldn't hear. "I know. Believe me, I know. But here's the thing. Disturbing the peace down here is a wildly subjective gray area. If she feels threatened by your demeanor or the noise you're making, and she's willing to swear out a complaint, it becomes a whole headache." "Wait, you're kidding, right?" I asked, keeping my voice down. "It's illegal to walk too loudly? Is there a decibel limit on footsteps in the Naples City Ordinance?" "No," Miller admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "But there is a general nuisance ordinance. And Barbara has the city council on speed dial. If I just drive away, she's going to escalate this to my captain, and then I have to write a mountain of paperwork about a guy's boots." He looked at me pleadingly. "Can you just, I don't know, change your gait? Walk a little softer? Just until you're out of her sight line? Please? I have 20 minutes left on my shift." I looked at Miller. He looked like he needed a nap more than I needed that Cuban sandwich. "So, let me get this straight," I said, a slow smile creeping onto my face. "Walking with purpose is aggressive. Heavy footfalls are a nuisance." "Essentially, yes," Miller said, looking relieved that I wasn't screaming at him. "Just tone it down." "Okay," I said. "Okay, if walking is aggressive, I guess I need to find a mode of transport that is legally classified as non-threatening, whimsical even." Miller frowned, clearly not liking the sound of that. "Sir, just have a great day, Officer Miller," I said loudly, stepping back. I turned to Barbara, who was smirking from her golf cart. "And thank you, ma'am, for bringing this to my attention. I will absolutely adjust my pedestrian methods immediately." I didn't walk to the sandwich shop. I went straight back to my apartment. The craving for roasted pork was completely replaced by a burning, all-consuming hunger for malicious compliance. I fired up my laptop. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to dive into the beautiful, convoluted mess that is the Florida state statutes and the Naples City Code. If walking normally was a nuisance, then I needed to figure out exactly what was protected under the law. I started pulling up local ordinances regarding noise, pedestrian traffic, and public disturbances. The language was, as Miller said, frustratingly vague. Unreasonable noise, actions that breach the peace, conduct lacking legitimate purpose. But I've been running sovereign justice long enough to know that vague laws are double-edged swords. If they are vague enough to be weaponized by a Karen, they are vague enough to be completely dismantled by a technicality. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing state laws with federal rights. And then I found it. The holy grail of public annoyance defense, the First Amendment right to expressive conduct in a public forum. The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld that the First Amendment doesn't just protect speech, it protects actions that are intended to convey a particularized message. Performance art, for instance. If I am merely walking, I am a pedestrian subject to local traffic and nuisance codes. But if I am performing, I am suddenly shielded by a massive federal constitutional umbrella. You can't just slap a noise violation on a public performance without navigating a labyrinth of time, place, and manner restrictions. I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. It was too perfect, but I didn't want to just stop there. Barbara had pissed me off, and I wanted to make sure my revenge was watertight. I pulled up the Collier County Property Appraiser's Public Records database. I looked up the address where our little confrontation happened. Number 42 Pelican Bay Boulevard. Barbara's house. I looked at the satellite imagery. I looked at the plotted property lines. Then, I pulled up the specific city zoning map for that block. My jaw dropped. Barbara had a massive, meticulously manicured ficus hedge that ran along the front of her property, thus acting as a privacy screen between her manicured lawn and the public sidewalk. It was easily 10 feet tall, thick, lush, and aggressively green. But according to the city's zoning maps and the legally defined utility and pedestrian easements, that hedge wasn't on her property. The city claimed a 6-foot easement from the edge of the street inward for public utilities and right-of-way. Barbara's precious hedge was planted exactly 4 feet from the curb. She was encroaching on 2 feet of public property. The entire length of her prized privacy shield was technically sitting on land she didn't own. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. A plan was forming. A beautiful, ridiculous, completely legally binding plan. I didn't just have a defense, I had an offensive strategy. As if my walking was too aggressive for her delicate sensibilities, I was going to give her a performance she would never forget. And I was going to do it right on the edge of her illegal property line. I started typing up a document, formatting it to look as official as possible. Notice of Public Expressive Conduct. I cited Supreme Court precedents. I cited Florida Statute 877.03 regarding the specific definitions of breach of peace, making sure to highlight the exemptions for protected speech. I printed it out and slipped it into a clear plastic lanyard. Tomorrow, I wasn't just going to walk down Pelican Bay Boulevard. Honestly, waking up the next morning, I felt like a kid on Christmas. Like, literally giddy. I rolled out of bed, and the first thing I saw was that laminated Notice of Public Expressive Conduct sitting on my kitchen counter next to my coffee maker. I mean, it's not every day you get to weaponize constitutional law against a woman whose primary hobby is terrorizing pedestrians. I brewed an offensively strong cup of coffee, staring at the little plastic badge. It was a masterpiece of legal jargon, citing everything from local noise exemption clauses to Supreme Court precedents on freedom of expression. I slipped the lanyard over my neck. It rested perfectly against my chest, right over my obnoxiously bright neon yellow athletic shirt. If I was going to be a public nuisance, a public performer, I needed to be highly visible. I laced up the exact same heavy leather boots from the day before, the ones that had apparently threatened the very fabric of Naples society. I hit the pavement around 11 a.m. The humidity was already doing that thing where it feels like you're walking through warm soup. But I didn't care. I was energized. I strolled normally for the first few blocks, just a regular guy enjoying the breeze, until I reached the perimeter of Pelican Bay Boulevard. I paused right at the corner, about 50 yards from number 42. I took a deep breath. I stretched my calves. You can't just jump into aggressive whimsy without a proper warm-up. You'll pull a hamstring. I stepped onto the bleached white concrete of Barbara's block. But I didn't walk. No, walking is for pedestrians, and pedestrians get yelled at by tired cops. I launched myself into a skip. Let me paint this picture for you. I am a grown, 6'2" man. I am not built for grace. A skip is fundamentally just a step-hop motion, but when you add heavy leather boots and a complete lack of shame, it becomes a seismic event. Thud-hop, thud-hop. I drove my knees up as high as they would go. I swung my arms in massive, exaggerated arcs like I was marching in a parade for heavily caffeinated toddlers. It took so much more cardio than I was anticipating, honestly, but the sheer absurdity of it fueled me. And you can't just skip in silence. That's just weird exercising. Performance art requires an audio component. So I inhaled deeply and began to sing. I didn't pick a pop song or rock anthem. No, I went with the public domain classics. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. I belted it out at the top of my lungs. I have zero vocal training. So it sounded like a dying walrus trying to communicate across a canyon. But volume was the goal here, not pitch. Thud-hop, thud-hop. I was closing in on Barbara's property line. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. I saw movement behind the massive, illegally placed ficus hedge. A face appeared in the gap between the leaves. It was Barbara. She was holding a pair of gardening shears, and she looked like her brain had just encountered a fatal error. Her jaw was literally unhinged. She dropped the shears. They clattered against the driveway. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. I was directly in front of her house now, right on the edge of the public easement, throwing my knees so high I was practically kicking my own chin. I maintained unbreakable, aggressive eye contact with her through the bushes, and she scrambled backward, tripping slightly over a garden gnome, and pulled her gold-cased iPhone out of her pocket. I could see her hands shaking with pure, unadulterated suburban rage. She held the phone up, pointing the camera right at me. Oh, she wanted to film? Cool. The performer loves an audience. And the itsy-bitsy spider went up the spout again. I finished the verse with a massive, soaring crescendo. I stopped skipping, planted my left boot firmly on the concrete, threw my arms gracefully above my head, and executed what I can only describe as the clumsiest, most violent triple pirouette ever attempted on the Gulf Coast. I stumbled on the landing, caught my balance, and gave her a deep, theatrical bow. "What in the name of God are you doing?" she shrieked from behind her phone. "You lunatic! I'm calling the police." "I'm performing, Barbara," I yelled back, tapping the laminated lanyard on my chest with a massive grin. "It's a beautiful day for the arts. Honestly, you should join me. It does wonders for the glutes." "You are a menace," she screamed, retreating toward her front porch. "You're harassing me. You're intentionally trying to cause a scene." "Just exercising my First Amendment rights on a public thoroughfare, ma'am," I called out, transitioning smoothly into a lively rendition of Row, Row, Row Your Boat as I skipped away down the block. Thud-hop, thud-hop. I didn't look back, but I could hear her screaming at the 911 dispatcher before I even hit the next intersection. I skipped for another 2 blocks before my lungs started burning, and then I ducked into an alley to catch my breath. Laughing so hard I actually got a cramp. Phase 1 was a massive success. But I knew the skipping was just the appetizer. The real meat of the revenge was going to require some heavy lifting. Literally. Later that week, I set up a meeting with a local contractor I'd used before. His name is Big Tony. Big Tony is exactly what he sounds like. I mean, the guy is basically a walking cinder block wrapped in a high-vis vest. He has hands the size of dinner plates, and a voice that sounds like gravel in a blender. He's a good guy, but he doesn't ask a lot of questions as long as the check clears. I told him to meet me on Pelican Bay Boulevard, right near the corner of Barbara's Street. When his massive F250 pulled up, I was already standing on the grass strip between the sidewalk and Barbara's towering ficus hedge. Tony stepped out of his truck, holding a massive thermos of coffee. He looked at me, looked at the perfectly manicured neighborhood, and then looked at the spot I was pointing to on the ground. "All right, Gazer," Tony rumbled, scratching his beard. "What's the project? You bought a place in the snob zone?" "No, Tony," I said, grinning. "I'm doing an installation, right here." I pointed to the grass directly in front of Barbara's hedge. Technically, it was the city's utility easement, but practically it was 2 feet away from where Barbara's illegal hedge started. Tony frowned. "An installation? Like, what, a sprinkler system?" "No, art. Well, temporary art that also functions as a highly specific piece of telecommunications equipment." I pulled a folded blueprint out of my back pocket and handed it to him. Tony unfolded it, and his brow furrowed so deeply it looked like a trench. "Bro, this is a schematic for a 15-foot galvanized steel pole with a rotating, wind-powered flag mount on top. And you want me to bolt it to a concrete base, right here on the sidewalk edge?" "Exactly," I said. "And the flag is going to be custom printed. It's going to say freedom of speech in aggressively large neon pink letters, like the exact same shade of pink as a certain golf cart's steering wheel." Tony looked at me like I was having a stroke. "Gazer, I can't pour concrete on a city easement without 47 permits, a blood sacrifice, and approval from the Pelican Bay Master HOA. This lady," he jerked his thumb toward the house behind the hedge, "is gonna have the cops down here before I even mix the cement." "That's the beautiful part, Tony," I said, is stepping closer. "We aren't pouring a permanent foundation. We are using a heavy-duty, temporary, above-ground, weighted base, like the kind they use for temporary stoplights. And more importantly, this isn't just a flagpole. See this little box mounted on the side of the schematic?" Tony squinted at the paper. Meh. "Yeah, looks like a Wi-Fi router." "It's a fixed wireless receiver," I explained, leaning in like I was telling him a state secret. "I registered a Shell LLC yesterday for a local wireless internet service provider. I am legally conducting a signal strength test for a potential community mesh network. Under the FCCOTARD rule, the over-the-air reception devices rule, local zoning laws, and specifically HOA restrictions, I cannot unreasonably delay or prevent the installation of antennas and fixed wireless devices on property you control or have legal access to." Tony stared at me. "But you don't own this property. It's the city's." "Correct. But I pulled a temporary public right-of-way communications testing permit from the county clerk's office online this morning. Cost me $45. As long as the base doesn't block A wheelchair access on the sidewalk, which it won't because we're putting it on the grass strip, the city can't touch it without giving me a 30-day notice to appeal." "And the HOA? They have literally zero jurisdiction over a federal communications test on a public easement. If this lady touches it, she's technically tampering with telecommunications infrastructure. Tony slowly lowered the blueprint. A terrifying grin spread across his face. You are an absolute psychopath. I prefer the term statutory enthusiast, I said. Can you have it built and dropped here by Friday morning? For you? I'll have the boys paint the pole pink too if you want. Tony laughed, slapping me on the back hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Friday morning rolled around, and the trap was officially set. I wasn't there when Tony dropped the rig off, but he sent me a picture. It was glorious. A massive, brutalist metal base sitting right on the grass, holding up a sleek 15-foot pole. At the top, a neon pink flag flapped violently in the coastal breeze, reading "Freedom of Speech" in bold block letters. And bolted to the side at eye level was a blinking, useless internet router in a weatherproof box. But it was the ugliest thing on the entire block by a massive margin. It took exactly 4 hours for the fallout to reach me. I got an email. Not a phone call. An email. It was flagged as urgent, high importance from the Pelican Bay Master Homeowners Association. Now, I don't live in Barbara's specific subdivision, but my apartment complex on the other side of town falls under the massive, overarching umbrella of the Master Community Board. The email was a formal summons to an emergency disciplinary hearing that evening. They cited me for unauthorized installation of a nuisance structure, violation of community aesthetic guidelines, and my personal favorite, unauthorized skipping and vocal disruption. Honestly, I was thrilled. They were taking the bait faster than I anticipated. The HOA meetings were held at the community clubhouse, and a building that looked like a replica of a Roman bathhouse, but smelled entirely of chlorine and stale coffee. The hearing was set for 7 p.m. I decided I needed to dress for the occasion. I bypassed my usual t-shirt and jeans and went straight to the back of my closet. I pulled out my tuxedo, a full, tailored black tie tuxedo. If you're going to completely dismantle a local bureaucratic body, you might as well look like James Bond doing it. I walked into the clubhouse boardroom at exactly 6:59 p.m. The room was lined with dark wood paneling, and a long mahogany table sat in the center. Behind the table sat 5 board members, all glaring at me with varying levels of disdain. Sitting in the center, acting as vice president of the board, was Barbara. She was wearing a violently floral blouse and her trademark jewel-encrusted bifocals, but her face was a mask of pure, self-righteous fury. I stood at the end of the table, adjusted my bow tie, and offered them a polite, close-mouthed smile. Mr. Ibrahim, the board president, a guy named Richard who looked like his skin was made of old leather, started. We don't appreciate a mockery being made of these proceedings. Why are you wearing a tuxedo? I apologize, Richard, I said smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. I take these community meetings very seriously. I wanted to show the utmost respect for the board's time. Barbara slammed her hand on the table. Enough games! You know exactly why you are here. You have been terrorizing my street, first with your aggressive stomping, then with that psychotic skipping and screaming about spiders. And now, you have dumped a hideous cell tower monstrosity directly on my front lawn. I raised an eyebrow. On your front lawn, Barbara, are you sure about that? It is directly in front of my privacy hedge, she shrieked. It is an eyesore. It is a massive violation of the CC&Rs regarding unauthorized structures, and you are going to remove it tonight, or we are fining you $500 a day. I slowly reached into my tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. I opened it and casually slid a stack of legally certified, county-stamped papers down the polished mahogany table. They glided perfectly and stopped right in front of Richard. "I'm afraid you guys are slightly misinformed regarding your jurisdiction here," I said, pacing slowly in front of the table. "First of all, regarding the structure, that is a temporary, a non-permanent fixed wireless testing node. I have a county-issued right-of-way permit, which is the green paper on top there. Furthermore, the device is protected under the FCC's OTARD regulations. The HOA literally has no legal authority to demand its removal or issue fines for it. It is federal jurisdiction." Richard put on his reading glasses and picked up the permit. He scanned it, his jaw tightening. "This says you're testing for a community network. You don't run an internet company." "My LLC paperwork is the second page, Richard," I countered without missing a beat. "Completely legitimate, but that's actually not the most interesting part of that folder. I suggest you look at the third document. It's a land survey map of Pelican Bay Boulevard, specifically Block 42. Sourced directly from the county property appraiser's office." Barbara scoffed. "We don't care about your fake permits. We care about the aesthetic integrity of my property line." "And that, Barbara, is the crux of the issue," I said, my voice dropping an octave as I leaned across the table, locking eyes with her. "You see, when you complained about my aggressive walking, it really got me thinking about the safety of our sidewalks. So I looked into the zoning maps. According to the city, there is a 6-foot public easement extending inward from the street curb. That land belongs to the city for public use, utilities, and pedestrian safety." The room went dead silent. Richard looked up from the map, his eyes wide. He looked at Barbara, then back at the map. "I placed my communications node exactly 2 feet from the curb," I continued. I'm savoring every single syllable. "Which is well within the public easement. But while I was out there, I noticed something fascinating. Your massive, 10-foot-tall, incredibly expensive ficus hedge? The one you use to block out the view of pedestrians like me?" Barbara's face started to drain of color. "My hedge was planted by professional landscapers 15 years ago. It is perfectly legal." "Actually, Barbara, it's not," I said, a massive, cynical smile spreading across my face. "Your hedge is planted exactly 4 feet from the curb, which means it is encroaching 2 full feet onto city property, running the entire length of your lot. You have been illegally occupying public land for a decade and a half. And you know what the city does when they receive a formal complaint with survey evidence about an illegal encroachment that blocks the public right-of-way?" Richard closed the folder and slowly rubbed his temples. "They order an immediate teardown at the homeowner's expense." "Bingo," I said, popping the P loudly. Barbara stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "You are lying. This is a fabrication. I am the vice president of this board, and I will not be threatened by a skipping hooligan in a cheap suit." "It's a tailored tuxedo, actually," I corrected her gently. "And I'm not threatening you. I already filed the complaint with the city inspector's office this morning, along with the survey evidence. Honestly, I was just so concerned about the public safety aspect. And those branches were looking awfully aggressive." I let the silence hang in the air. The look of absolute, crushing defeat washing over Barbara's face was worth every single moment of skipping, the weird looks from the cops, and the cost of the tuxedo rental. She slowly sat back down, staring blankly at the mahogany table. The other board members were completely silent, realizing that I hadn't just beaten them on a technicality. I had completely dismantled their vice president, using her own weaponized bureaucracy against her. "Anyway," I said, buttoning my tuxedo jacket and turning toward the door. "I guess we're done here. Let me know if you guys need any help with the demolition cleanup. Have fun with this one. It's a ride." I literally didn't even wait for the sun to fully rise the next morning. Honestly, I woke up at like 6:30 a.m., buzzing with this chaotic, deeply petty energy that you only get when you know you are legally untouchable and about to ruin someone's entire weekend. I mean, the HOA meeting was a masterpiece, but Barbara still hadn't fully grasped the reality of her situation. She probably thought she could just make a few phone calls to her nephew on the city council and make my public right-of-way permit disappear. She clearly didn't understand how federal telecommunications law works, which I guess is a pretty common blind spot for retired neighborhood tyrants. I put on my heaviest boots, the exact same ones that had started this whole absurd saga. I grabbed my neon yellow athletic shirt, threw my laminated performance permit lanyard around my neck, and headed out into the balmy, aggressively humid Florida morning. It was Saturday, and at 8 a.m. in Naples, the only people awake are hardcore joggers and people who pay a lot of money to play golf before it gets too hot. I strolled casually until I hit Pelican Bay Boulevard. And there it was, standing like a monument to malicious compliance, Big Tony's 15-foot galvanized steel pole sitting squarely on the grassy public easement directly in front of Barbara's illegally encroaching ficus hedge. The neon-pink freedom of speech flag was snapping lazily in the morning breeze. The fake internet router box was blinking a little green LED light, looking incredibly official. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like salt and expensive landscaping mulch. I stretched my legs, cracked my neck, and launched myself into the most violently energetic skip of my entire life. Thud hop! Thud hop! I brought my knees up to my chest, when I swung my arms wildly, and I started singing, "London Bridge is falling down," at a volume that honestly could have shattered glass. "London Bridge is falling down! Falling down! Falling down!" I skipped back and forth along the 20-foot stretch of public sidewalk right in front of her house, my heavy boots slapping the concrete like rhythmic gunshots. I made sure to occasionally circle the base of my pink flagpole, like it was a legally protected maypole. It took exactly 3 minutes for the front door of number 42 to fly open. Barbara stormed out onto her pristine brick paver driveway, wearing a silk, floral print bathrobe and no makeup. She looked completely unhinged. She didn't have her golf cart to hide behind this time. She marched right up to the edge of her illegal hedge, practically hyperventilating. Churton pointed a trembling finger at me through a gap in the leaves. "Are you out of your mind?" she shrieked, her voice completely drowning out the distant sound of lawn mowers. "It is 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. You are a psychopath. I am calling the police right now. I am having you arrested for harassment and trespassing." "I'm on a public sidewalk, Barbara," I yelled back cheerfully, not breaking my skipping stride for a single second. Thud hop, thud hop. "And I am engaging in a protected, expressive performance. Frankly, your shouting is disrupting my artistic flow. Build it up with iron bars, iron bars, iron bars." She let out a sound that was half scream, half growl, and pulled her gold iPhone out of her bathrobe pocket. She started violently jabbing at the screen. "You are going to jail!" she screamed. "You are going to rot in a cell, you absolute menace!" "Cool! Tell them to send Officer Miller," I shouted over my shoulder, executing a flawless, albeit incredibly heavy, pirouette around the base of the otard pole. "He loves my work," I kept skipping. I kept singing. I cycled through London Bridge, the Muffin Man, and a highly aggressive rendition of Mary Had a Little Lamb. My calves were literally screaming, but I was running on pure spite. About 15 minutes later, the familiar white Ford Explorer rolled down the street, its lights flashing silently. It pulled up to the curb, right next to my pink flagpole. The engine idled. I stopped skipping, panting heavily, and leaned against the steel pole. The door opened, and Officer Miller stepped out. I honestly felt a tiny pang of guilt when I saw his face. But the man looked like he hadn't slept since our last encounter. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he held a large, steaming cup of gas station coffee like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the mortal plane. He looked at the massive pink flag. He looked at the blinking router box. He looked at my laminated lanyard. Then he looked at Barbara, who was practically vibrating with rage on the other side of the hedge. He took a long, slow sip of his coffee. He closed his eyes for a full 3 seconds. "Officer Miller!" Barbara shrieked, bursting through the gap in the bushes and stepping onto the sidewalk. "Arrest him! Arrest him right now! Look at this! This monstrosity he put on my lawn! And he has been screaming nursery rhymes for 20 minutes! This is harassment! This is stalking! Or say he is targeting me!" Miller slowly lowered his coffee cup. "Ma'am, is this structure on your lawn, or is it on the easement?" "It doesn't matter," she yelled, waving her arms. "It's an eyesore, and he is a public nuisance. You told him to stop stomping, so now he's skipping and screaming. Arrest him for disturbing the peace." Miller turned to me. He looked so incredibly exhausted. "Sir, talk to me. Tell me why I shouldn't just put you in the back of my cruiser so I can get a moment of silence." "Because, Officer Miller," I said, catching my breath and wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead, "I am not disturbing the peace. I am exercising my First Amendment rights in a traditional public forum." I unclipped the laminated lanyard from my neck and handed it to him. He took it, by squinting at the dense legal text I had formatted to look like a city permit. "As you can see," I explained, using my most polite, cooperative tone, "I am engaging in a piece of public performance art. I am attempting to highlight the absurdity of over-policed pedestrian movement by contrasting heavy, militaristic footwear with whimsical, childlike motion and song. It's a commentary on the juxtaposition of innocence and authority." Miller stared at me over the top of the laminated card. He didn't blink. "You're doing a commentary." "Yes, sir," I said, keeping a completely straight face. "And as per the Supreme Court ruling in Shuttlesworth versus City of Birmingham, the sidewalk is a traditional public forum. My expressive conduct is protected. I am not blocking pedestrian traffic. I am not using amplified sound equipment. And I am not using fighting words. Furthermore, this structure here..." I patted the galvanized steel pole. "This is a fixed wireless testing node. It is protected under the FCC's OTA-RD rule. Local authorities, including law enforcement and the HOA, cannot mandate its removal as it sits on a public right-of-way with a valid county permit, which is also in that lanyard." Miller slowly flipped the lanyard over, reading the printed county permit on the back. He stood there in silence for a long time. The only sound was the wind snapping the neon pink flag above our heads. "He is making it up," Barbara screeched, inching closer to the officer. "He is just trying to torture me. It's a fake flag and a fake internet thing, and his skipping is a threat." Miller let out a sigh that seemed to deflate his entire body. Yet he handed the lanyard back to me. He turned to Barbara. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "He has a county permit for the pole. I can't touch it. If you have an issue with it, you need to call code enforcement. But looking at this permit, they won't touch it either." "But the screaming," she protested, tears of absolute frustration welling up in her eyes. "The skipping!" "Ma'am," Miller repeated, rubbing his temples. "He is legally skipping. There is literally no law against joy, no matter how obnoxious it is. He is not violating any municipal noise ordinances for this time of day without amplified speakers. He is on a public sidewalk. He is, technically, legally, untouchable by my department right now." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. You're taking his side? You're letting him get away with this? I'm not taking a side, Barbara, Miller said, turning back toward his cruiser. I'm just a guy who wants to finish his shift and go to sleep. Do not call 911 again, unless there is a fire, a medical emergency, or an actual crime being committed. Skipping is not a crime. He opened his car door, paused, and looked back at me. Your commentary, he said, deadpan. It's very moving. Try not to pull a muscle. Thank you, officer, I said, saluting him with 2 fingers. Miller drove away. Barbara stood on the sidewalk, completely paralyzed by the realization that her ultimate weapon, the police, was entirely useless against someone who actually understood the law. She looked at me. She looked at the pink flag. She turned around, marched back through her illegal hedge, and slammed her front door so hard I heard the glass rattle. I guess I could have gone home then. I had won the battle. But the war wasn't over. Because the skipping was just a distraction. The real devastation was currently working its way through the bureaucratic pipeline of the Collier County Code Enforcement Office. I spent the next 4 days laying low. I didn't go back to Pelican Bay Boulevard. I just monitored my email, waiting for the seed I had planted at the city inspector's office to finally sprout. Honestly, government bureaucracy usually moves at the speed of tectonic plates, but there's a magic phrase you can use to fast-track almost anything. Public safety hazard. When I filed my complaint about Barbara's encroaching hedge, as I specifically noted that the thick branches were obstructing the line of sight for pedestrians and forcing children on bicycles to swerve dangerously close to the street. In a wealthy, hyper-litigious city like Naples, liability is the magic word that gets people out of their office chairs. It was a Wednesday morning when I got the notification. A city surveyor team had been dispatched to Block 42. I grabbed my keys, threw a folding lawn chair into the back of my car, and drove down to Pelican Bay. I parked a block away, grabbed my chair, and walked over. I set it up on the grass easement right next to my pink flagpole, sat down, and cracked open a can of sparkling water. I literally had front-row seats to the greatest show on earth about 20 minutes later, as a heavy-duty white pickup truck with orange flashing lights on the roof rolled up. On the side of the door was the Collier County seal, and the words, Department of Zoning and Land Use. 2 guys in bright orange vests and hard hats got out. They didn't look tired like Officer Miller. They looked deeply focused and heavily armed with measuring equipment. One guy had a massive tripod-mounted laser level, and the other was holding a heavy tablet and a can of neon orange marking paint. They didn't even look at me or my pink flag. They went straight to work. The guy with the tablet walked over to the storm drain at the corner of the street, referenced his screen, and nodded. All right, pulling from the master datum point, he yelled to his partner. We got a 6-foot public right-of-way from the curb line, was extending entire length of the parcel. The guy with the laser level set it up. The other guy grabbed a massive, heavy-duty measuring wheel and started walking down the curb, measuring exactly 6 feet inward. Every 10 feet, he stopped, shook the can of neon orange paint, and sprayed a massive, thick line directly onto the ground. Psh, psh, psh. He sprayed the first line on the grass. Then he moved forward. Psh, psh. The next line went directly across the pristine brick pavers of Barbara's custom driveway apron. The guy kept walking. He hit the start of her massive, prized 10-foot-tall ficus hedge. He pushed through the thick, leafy branches, measuring exactly 6 feet from the street. I heard the hiss of the paint can from deep inside the bushes. Psh, psh. He emerged on the other side, covered in a few stray leaves, and kept walking. He reached a beautiful imported Italian stone water fountain that Barbara had installed near her mailbox. He measured. He shook the can. He sprayed a neon orange line right across the base of the expensive stonework. It was a bloodbath of zoning regulations. The orange dashed line cut a brutal, undeniable path straight through the front of her property, clearly indicating that at least 2 to 3 feet of everything she had built. The driveway apron, the hedge, the fountain, and her 2 obnoxious private property no trespassing signs were sitting illegally on city land. The noise of the surveying equipment and the guys shouting measurements to each other finally pierced the soundproof walls of number 42. The front door opened and Barbara came storming out. She wasn't wearing a bathrobe this time. She was wearing a sharply tailored pantsuit, looking like she was ready for a board meeting, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure panic. "What are you doing?" she screamed, marching down her driveway. "Stop spraying that paint on my pavers! You are defacing private property! Who are you?" The surveyor with the tablet didn't even flinch. He just held up a hand to stop her from stepping over the fresh orange paint. "Ma'am, step back, please. Collier County Zoning. We're conducting an emergency right-of-way survey based on a hazard complaint." "Hazard complaint?" Barbara shrieked, looking wildly around until her eyes landed on me, sitting in my lawn chair, sipping my sparkling water. "He did this! This lunatic is harassing me! You need to leave my property immediately." "We aren't on your property, ma'am," the surveyor said, but his tone incredibly bored. He tapped his tablet screen. "According to the county plat maps, your property line ends right here." He pointed to the dashed orange line running across her driveway. "Everything from this orange line to the street is a public easement, which means your driveway extension, your fountain, and this entire hedge," he gestured to the massive wall of green, "are illegal encroachments on city land." Barbara stared at the orange line. You could physically see the reality of the situation crashing down on her. No, that's impossible. I have lived here for 15 years. The landscapers put that hedge in. The HOA approved it." "The HOA doesn't own the city streets, ma'am," the surveyor replied, pulling a thick pad of triplicate carbon copy forms out of his vest. He clicked a pen. "Unfortunately, since this was flagged as a pedestrian safety hazard, and the survey confirms a significant obstruction of the right-of-way, we are issuing an immediate notice of abatement." He started scribbling furiously on the pad. "Abatement?" Barbara whispered, the fight completely draining out of her voice. "What does that mean?" "It means you have 14 days to remove the encroaching structures, or the city will send contractors to remove them for you, and the cost will be added as a lien against your property taxes." He ripped the pink slip, the beautiful, devastating pink slip, off the pad and handed it to her. "That includes the pavers, the fountain, and the entirety of the hedge that crosses the orange line. Have a good day, ma'am." The 2 surveyors packed up their equipment, got back into their truck, and drove away. Barbara just stood there in the middle of her driveway, holding the laminated pink slip. She looked at the orange line. She looked at her 10-foot-tall, incredibly lush, thousands of dollars worth of landscaping privacy hedge. And then she slowly turned to look at me. I raised my can of sparkling water in a silent toast. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just turned around, walked back inside, and shut the door with a quiet, defeated click. Honestly, I thought she would hire a lawyer. I thought she would try to fight the city, file an injunction, delay the process for months. But I guess when you're caught dead to rights by the county surveyor's laser level, even the most expensive lawyer in Naples can't move the municipal property line. The 14-day cure period came and went. Barbara didn't move a single leaf. She didn't tear up the pavers. She didn't move the fountain. I think she was deep in denial, hoping the city would just forget about it. They did not forget. On the morning of the 15th day, the heavy machinery arrived. I made sure I was there. I brought a thermos of coffee and leaned against my pink freedom of speech pole. The city didn't send delicate landscapers. They sent a massive, yellow Caterpillar skid steer loader with a brutal steel grapple bucket on the front, accompanied by a heavy-duty dump truck. 3 guys in high-vis yellow shirts hopped out. They looked at the orange lines sprayed on the ground. The crew foreman nodded, climbed into the cab of the skid steer, and fired up the diesel engine. The roar was deafening. Barbara came running out of her house, waving her arms frantically. "Wait, stop! I'm calling my nephew! You can't do this!" The foreman couldn't even hear her over the engine. He just pointed to the orange line, gave her a thumbs up, and drove the heavy machinery straight toward her prized hedge. It was a slaughter. The grapple bucket slammed into the thick base of the ficus trees. The steel jaws clamped shut, and the machine reversed. There was a terrifying sound of snapping wood and ripping roots. A massive 10-foot section of the hedge was violently torn out of the earth, exposing the bare dirt beneath. The machine lifted the massive chunk of greenery into the air, swung around, and unceremoniously dropped it into the back of the dump truck. Barbara fell to her knees on her manicured lawn, literally sobbing as 15 years of suburban privacy was systematically dismantled in less than 20 minutes. And the skid steer didn't stop there. It drove its heavy tracks right over the illegal section of her brick paver driveway, crushing the stones into dust, and then gently, but forcefully, pushed the Italian stone fountain over, shattering the base so it could be scooped up. When the dust finally settled and the machinery drove away, the front of number 42 looked like a war zone. The massive, beautiful privacy wall was completely gone. In its place was a ragged trench of exposed dirt and broken roots. You could see straight into her large front living room window. There was absolutely no barrier between her pristine, quiet life and the dirty, noisy public street. She was completely, entirely exposed. I unclipped my laminated performance permit and put it in my pocket. The show was over. The finale had been spectacular. Bumped. I walked over to the edge of the orange paint line. Barbara was sitting on the grass, staring blankly at the ruined dirt trench. "You know," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet morning air, "if you hadn't complained about my heavy footfalls, I never would have noticed the property line discrepancy. I guess sometimes it pays to just let people walk to get a sandwich." She didn't say a word. She didn't even look at me. She was utterly broken by the sheer force of municipal zoning enforcement. I turned around. I took one last deep breath of the balmy Florida air. And then I launched into one final, glorious skip. Thud-hop, thud-hop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. I skipped down the block, my heavy boots slapping the pavement, leaving Pelican Bay Boulevard far behind me. About a month later, what Big Tony went back to retrieve the pink flagpole and the weighted base, he sent me a photo from the site. The dirt trench where the hedge used to be had been seeded over with cheap, patchy city grass. But that wasn't the best part of the photo. Staked firmly into the lawn of number 42, right next to her front door, was a bright red and white sign. For sale. By owner. Barbara was moving. I guess living without a privacy hedge, totally exposed to the aggressive pedestrianism of the outside world, was just too much for her delicate sensibilities to handle. The neighborhood was finally a safe, skip-friendly zone. And that is exactly how you handle a bully with an HOA badge and a golf cart. You don't yell, you don't fight. You dig into the codes, you find the exact inch where they crossed the line, and you let the crushing weight of the law do the heavy lifting for you. This is why I do what I do. This is the entire point. Sovereign justice isn't just a channel. It's a lifestyle of weaponized paperwork and glorious petty victories. Like, honestly, make sure you know exactly where your property line ends before you start throwing stones. Because the next person walking down your street might just be looking for an excuse to tear down your wall.